Hello, everybody. It is Tuesday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, Assistant Sports Editor for Multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined by our longtime Steelers beat writer, Ed Bouchette, for Brian Batko's weekly Chipped Ham and Football podcast. Brian is on the road back from Buffalo, so you're stuck with me. But fortunately, we've got Ed to talk to you. Ed, how have you been?
I'm good, Brian. When you say longtime beat writer, you need to say emeritus, right?
Yes. Emeritus. I don't know how you pronounce that.
Emeritus. Thank you. I never knew how to read. I knew how it's spelled. Didn't know how to pronounce it. Now I do.
Well, either way, Ed, we are here. We're talking about a 31-17 Steelers loss to the Buffalo Bills in the wild card round of the playoffs. We're going to get your reaction to some Mike Tomlin's future, his storm out of the press conference last night. We're also going to talk a little bit about the defense. And then, of course, how can we have a podcast without talking about quarterbacks? Before we do, just want to thank our primary sponsor for this episode of the podcast, Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560 to get started planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. Ed, let's just get into it first with your initial reactions to what we saw yesterday, both on the field and then off the field after the game, with Mike Tomlin cutting his press conference short after being asked about his future.
Well, Adam, I don't think too many people should have been surprised with what happened on the field. I mean, they were 10-point underdogs. Buffalo's at home. They have a much better quarterback. They do have a good, decent running game and defense. So it didn't surprise me. The only thing was the Steelers, again, getting off to such a slow start in a playoff game. That seems to be through this losing streak of playoff games what has happened. Now, they caught up a couple times in previous games and came within 7 yesterday, but still, they dig themselves too much of a hole. At least this time, nobody snapped the ball over Mason Rudolph's head to start the game, but it was, a lot of these playoff games have been the same way. They've been over by halftime, basically.
Yeah. 21 points is a lot to spot any team. It's one thing if you give up some field goals, but there was no real weathering of the storm, and that's what you have to do if you want to win on the road in the playoffs. Ed, obviously a lot of speculation about Mike Tomlin and where he goes from here, how he reacted to the question about his future last night. Did you have any reaction to that? And what's your read on where things might go with him this offseason?
Well, I was surprised Mike did that because he's pretty savvy. He knows how to answer questions. He knows how to deflect that kind of a question and deal with it later. He had to know it was coming. Maybe that was by design. Certainly, we're talking about that maybe a little more than we would talk about how badly his team played. So maybe that was his whole mindset. I don't know. But it's maybe not a question he has to answer, but it's one has to be answered by someone here soon, whether that's by verbally answered or by actions. Either he's staying with an extension or he's leaving, right? I don't think it's going to happen that nothing's going to happen, that he's going into the last year of his contract and that's that. That won't happen, I don't think.
Do you read some of this posturing over I don't even know if you can call it posturing, but obviously these leaks that he's thinking about his future have come from somewhere. And the way he kind of did call attention to the situation last night, do you think any of it is some kind of leverage play to make the extension happen sooner than later? Or how do you read his decision to answer the question that way by not answering and kind of making a viral moment out of it?
Yeah, it's always possible that this has to do with trying to gain some leverage. I don't know that he needs to do that, but when Jay Glazer of Fox said it, that's when my ears perked up, because Jay and Mike are close. I saw that years ago, and So when he comes out with something about Mike Tomlin, I tend to believe it. And he didn't say he was leaving, but he's just said it was up to him, and I do believe that. I think the Steelers want him back. It would not surprise me at all. And in fact, I expect that the Steelers would offer him a contract extension if he wants it. And I'm saying this sitting here 2 years removed from covering that team. So I don't know that that's the case, but I just, putting everything together, I would think that that is what is going to happen. Either they offer him a contract extension and he takes it, or he says, you know what, it's time to move on.
Ed, I want to talk about the defense. This was, I mentioned to you before the podcast, 5th straight playoff game you allow 31 or 30 plus points. It's hard to win in the NFL in any context that way. It's certainly hard to win in the playoffs in cold weather, giving up that many points. At what point, is it fair to question whether this defense, as constituted, built around TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Cam Heyward, is ever going to put it together when it matters and be the, try to replicate those great units of the past, of the 70s, of those aughts teams that made the Super Bowl, won Super Bowls. Because listen, these guys have been together for this was their 4th season, all 3 of them on the same team. Next year will be year 5. Do you think they're ever going to be great in these big games?
Well, they need more players, Adam. You mentioned those 3, and those 3 are wonderful players, all pros, each one of them. Maybe not necessarily this season, but in the past. And but I don't know what they have around them. I thought the defense was overrated coming into this season. I did expect more from the offense, actually. You had a rookie at cornerback. He actually has come on better than I think a lot of people thought. But you still need corners. You're down a safety, I think. Inside linebackers, and then you added the injuries to the inside linebackers. And that defensive line still needs to be fortified. So there's a lot of work yet to be done on that defense, even though you have those 3 players. You mentioned it's not about 3 players. They play with 11. And you mentioned the 70 Steelers. You go down that list of 11, and I don't think there was a weak link anywhere. And you could do that again in the 90s and in the aughts, that there were very few weak links, on those defenses.
Yeah, and people will point out the injuries. They'll point out the turnovers in some of these playoff games that kind of put the defense in bad position. But I also look at it as, they had the turnover, I think Buffalo got it on the 29-yard line. You give up a 29-yard touchdown pass on the first play. You don't, force a field goal. You don't keep things a little bit closer. And to me, that's what a great defense does. And I just, do you worry that with regard to those 3 guys that they're running out of time to figure these other links out, given that Cam Heyward is in his mid-30s now, that TJ Watt's coming up on the age where his brother, lost a lot of tread on the tire, and I don't think he ever had more than 12.5 sacks after age 30. And that, Minkah Fitzpatrick has, I think, some good years still left in him, but as a trio, I think you're coming to the end of them playing together in their prime.
Yeah, and all 3 have had injury problems, Adam, that have taken away significant time. And the older you get, you don't get better with injuries, that's for sure. So, yeah, that's a concern. But they need to refortify that defense, and I'm not sure how they do it other than through the draft. And they should have some money. I haven't looked at it, but in free agency, because they're not paying a big bundle to the quarterback. I'm not sure what they're going to do at that position. Maybe they need to bring somebody in after watching what happened this year, because overall they did not get good quarterback play, and I'm not sure they have that position locked down yet.
I do want to get into the quarterbacks in a little bit, and I want to ask a couple more questions on the defense, specifically Minkah Fitzpatrick. And I think it's a frustrating end of the season for him, right? He was a part of that 3-game losing streak against Arizona, New England, and Indianapolis that put the Steelers in the position they were in. Was absent for most of the 3-game run to end the season. Returns for the Buffalo game. I don't think played particularly well. Obviously, There's been a lot of criticism of how he didn't quite run out that Josh Allen 52-yard touchdown. I don't know if he could have stopped that play, Ed, but people were not pleased with the effort. And then obviously he gets shaken off by Shakir on that final Buffalo touchdown. What's your read on him and their decision to invest so much money? You mentioned the money they should have in free agency, but he has a $20 million plus cap hit each of the next 3 seasons. But it does the dead cap hit goes down after next season to about 13 million and then 6 million. Should he be playing for his job next season, or at least his place, on this particular roster?
I think he's done well for the most part here, Adam. He was, as you mentioned, he was injured this season, and again, I'm not sure. Not having the talent around him has hurt his play as well. But I wouldn't worry right now about Minkah or TJ Watt. I would worry about other things: inside linebacker, defensive line, another corner, another safety. They need these players, and I wouldn't worry about Minkah Fitzpatrick right now. I don't think there's a need.
But do you think they can address those positions effectively? I guess the way I'm asking this at is if you've got 50, 60 million sunk into 3 guys on this defense, can you address those other spots and with that much sunk into 3 guys, or do you need to maybe diffuse the money out a little bit? And maybe, I guess I can ask this in terms of Cam Heyward. If Cam Heyward steps away, does that maybe help at this point, considering how much they have invested in him with him getting into some injury issues this season?
Well, I think he's going to have to take a cut in his money for 2024, Adam. Jerome Bettis did that to come back. Of course, it worked out for him, but he took a pay cut a couple times. And I think it's time that Cam, at his age, would have to take a pay cut. And I think on how they approach it, it wouldn't surprise me if he's willing to do that. But you're not gonna ask TJ Watt or Minkah to do that. Cam is of the age you can. So I think Cam Heyward would be back at a reduced salary, and then you can use that. Hey, look, you can't fix it all in 1 year. You just can't. You can make some changes. You can start drafting some people at those positions, but you can't wave your magic wand over and find 7 new starters on defense if that's what you need. You just start plugging in. You sign a couple guys at free agency and hope for the best for next year. But this may not be a 1-year thing, Adam. Yeah,
and I think for a lot of Steelers fans, that's just frustrating because that was the same thing we were saying going into last season. But I think it remains very true at it, especially because you haven't cultivated the depth in the organization and they've relied so heavily on free agents, right? I mean, this was one of the biggest defensive free agent classes we've ever seen the Steelers go after, and it's because they had not cultivated the depth with guys like Isaiah Loudermilk, and DeMarvin Leal. Like, if those guys hit, you don't have to sign as many people. If Devin Bush hits, you don't have to go out and sign other people. But they don't, and that was the position they were in. Ed, last question I got for you on the defensive side. Where do you draw the source of optimism about TJ Watt's future, given that he's been injured the last couple of seasons, like you mentioned, and we kind of have a bit of a template in his brother, who, like I said, after age 30, his production nosedived pretty significantly. He was great when he was in there, but he was very rarely not available to the Texans and then the Cardinals. Why are you hopeful that things may play out differently with TJ Watt and that he still has, at least a few more good years, great years, elite years left in him?
Well, first, I wouldn't be worried about his brother. That's a different case. I know what you're saying, that they come from the same gene pool and everything, but the man led the NFL with 19 sacks this year, so I wouldn't be too worried about him right now. Other people have gotten injured, and he certainly does have a history of injuries, but I would just keep rolling with him until there's an obvious fall off, and I don't see that, Adam. So again, like with Minkah, I would not worry a bit about TJ Watt right now.
Let's get into the offense, talk a little bit about the quarterbacks. Before we do, just want to thank another sponsor, Pitt Johnstown. It's a Pitt quality education with up-close and personal learning, a top-ranked Northeast Public College by U.S. News and World Report. Generous scholarships and financial aid are available, located on 655 picturesque acres east, access to the city center, shopping and dining, vibrant campus life with an active D2 athlete community. Ed, you mentioned the quarterbacks and how important that is going to be going into the offseason. I think it is the number one story of the offseason. I've kind of delayed getting to it because I think the defense was kind of the story of yesterday. But as we get into where do the Steelers go from here, obviously quarterback is going to be the number one question. What is your read on where things stand with Mason Rudolph playing well in those last 3 regular season games, maybe not quite as well yesterday, Kenny Pickett riding the bench for those 4 games? What's your take on the quarterback situation overall?
Well, first, I'm going to start from the tail end, Adam. I'm going to thank Mitch Trubisky for his efforts and let him go. I don't think you can get anything in a trade. So you have to let him go and pick up a few bucks there and turn around and sign Mason Rudolph to a backup deal, a Trubisky kind of deal, and see if he'll take it. People worried about, other teams are going to be all after him. I don't think so. I don't think anybody's going to try and sign him to be their starter. And I do think that he has a chance to compete, at least to start here. So I think he'll be back. I really do. A couple-year contract, maybe 3-year contract. And then I would let those 2 guys compete. Him and Pickett, but I would not hesitate to bring someone else in, whether that's through a draft or signing maybe someone who's available. People have talked about Russell Wilson. I'm not so sure about Russell Wilson because, what is he, 35 years old? But the thing is, he won't cost you anything, and he may see this as an ideal spot to go to. And the reason I say it won't cost anything is because Denver's on the books for him next year, and the Steelers could sign him for the veteran minimum and bring him in. Anybody can. And again, I don't know that would be the Steelers, but he could be a stopgap kind of thing. And, you pause on Pickett and give him a year to, back up. I don't know. But I didn't like what I saw from Pickett this year. And what we saw from Mason Rudolph was really a small window.
Is free agency your preferred route, Ed, or what thought do you give to like a Michael Penix, who I think a lot of people don't see as a first-round pick, maybe more of a second or a third, just given all the weaknesses we just outlined, especially on defense and the places that they need to cultivate that depth. Do you think they can afford to spend a second or a third on a quarterback who may not be polished and may not be much better than what they already have in-house?
Yeah, Purdy wasn't very polished either, was he? You find your quarterbacks where you can get them. Normally, it's a first-round pick who comes through, but we've seen way too often other guys picked later and perform. Neil O'Donnell's an example. Now, people may say, he washed out here. Well, he got them. He helped get them to a Super Bowl. And actually, I think he would have been better off if he had stayed here after that. He left as a free agent. But he was a 3rd-round pick. Bobby Brister was not a bad quarterback. He was on some bad teams. He won 2 Super Bowls in Denver, and he was a 3rd-round pick. You can find those guys. Now, whether they like someone after that, I'm saying after the 1st round, and whether he falls to them, who knows? Famously, they said they had a 1st-round grade on Mason Rudolph and got him in the 3rd round. And, he still could be the guy. I'm not sure. He certainly played well in 3 games there and did not fold yesterday. He threw that interception in the end zone, but he came back. He helped bring that offense back, but, it was just too far to come from behind. And the running game wasn't working for him yesterday.
Yeah, I think you set me up well for the next question, Ed, which is how do you look at this group of skill players? Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, I think especially came on late in the season. I think you could say the same thing about Diontae Johnson and George Pickens. Pat Freiermuth had a couple of great games. Obviously, the game at Cincinnati, and then performed well yesterday. Was their top receiving target. Do they have the weapons that a better quarterback could make this offense work? Or do you still look and say that's a place they might need to draft and develop as well? Maybe get another receiver, maybe add to the tight end group. What's your read on where they stand with skill players? Is that a position of strength going into this offseason or something you'd like to bolster?
Adam, I think they need a third receiver. The running back situation to me is a good one. I just keep those guys. I'm not sure I would give Najee a fifth-year option, but he's only going into his fourth year, so he will be back next year. I think that the offensive line needs to be bolstered. They supposedly did that last year. I didn't like the effort. I don't like the left tackle play, and obviously the center play. I don't think anybody likes the center play. So you need to find a center. So that would be my focus on offense. Would be that offensive line.
Ed, what are your expectations going into next season? You mentioned you can't fix it all in an off season. I feel like the Steelers have as many holes at the end of this year as they kind of did at the end of last year, if maybe not a little bit more. What's a realistic hope for Steelers fans next season? Is it that you go into these playoffs and you really have a chance to win against anyone that's in the playoff field? Maybe you win a couple of rounds and fall a little bit short. Is it more of the same? I'm curious what your thoughts on what they have and what they can do to fix it in one off season.
Adam, things change in football anymore from year to year. It's hard to predict. I don't even know their schedule. It was supposedly easy this year, and then they lost to the easy teams. It's going to depend on that quarterback. Can they get the quarterback? Do they have the quarterback? I don't know yet. Certainly, as you look at the division, I would pick them fourth right now. I know they finished above Cincinnati, but they lost Burrow. So I would think that right now you're looking at the Steelers. I would bet the odds are they're the fourth team in the division right now. But again, there's so much that can happen. They could wind up with a new coach. We were talking about that at the top. So I don't know. I really don't. I think they'll be competitive. They were competitive this year for the most part. They lost a couple big games, one in Houston, one to San Francisco. When I say big games, I mean by big point differentials. But every other game they were in. So, they'll be competitive next year. How competitive is still to be determined.
I agree, Ed. Thank you so much for joining me. Any final thoughts on anything Steelers related before we sign off here?
No, just that, people shouldn't have been surprised, I don't think, with this season. The biggest surprise was when they got off to 7-3 and 6-4, and then they lost to those two teams at home. I think if they'd have won those two games, we'd be talking differently about the Steelers right now, even if they got rubbed out in the playoffs. And this thing about not having a winning playoff, not winning a playoff game since 2016 season, which they wound up in the AFC Championship game at New England when Le'Veon Bell got hurt. That to me is not that big a deal. I mean, they're competitive every year. I know everybody here is spoiled. There's those 6 Lombardi trophies, and Ben Roethlisberger, quarterback, was always a hope they could win a 7th, but that's not easy. I mean, it just isn't easy winning those. Look at what happened to the Philadelphia Eagles. They were 10-1, almost won the Super Bowl last year, and they got rubbed out by Tampa Bay and Baker Mayfield in the first round. It's not easy to do, and maintaining excellence is hard. And this team at least is competitive every year. And I know some people are going to go, but they're the Pittsburgh Steelers. Well, you know what? They've been saying that in Dallas too, and they haven't been to a Super Bowl since '95.
I agree, Ed. And you know what? I'll say this. I wonder what year people thought they were supposed to win a playoff game of this last handful. You're winding down a generational quarterback, but I look at that 2020 season where you lose to the Browns, and there were signs that Ben Roethlisberger was not the same guy late in that season. Obviously, his arm blows up in 2019. That torpedoes that season. 2021, he just wasn't the same guy. His retirement season. Then you're going into a year of quarterback transition last year with Kenny Pickett. I look at this year as kind of the first year that they maybe left some things on the table, right? And I really felt like Mike Tomlin got the most out of these teams during this period of transition. Is that an unfair assessment of where they've been?
Yeah, it is, Adam. And if you look, I covered most of those playoff games until this last year. They had some key injuries in those playoff games, and people are going to go, "Oh, you're making excuses." Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, Marquise Pouncey at key points. And when they lost to Tim Tebow in Denver, I thought that was the best thing that could happen, because they were going to go to New England next week and get killed because they didn't have a number of players left, key guys. They were getting hurt. They were hurt before that game, and they were getting hurt in that game. People always talk about the Tim Tebow game. That, to me, they were decimated by injuries in that game.
Yeah, I agree. And listen, I think there's valid criticism of the way this season ended, but I think it's the first year that I can really say that in a while that they left something on the table. And so listen, I think you got to see results from here, but I agree with you, Ed. I don't put as much emphasis on that playoff record as others do. But thank you so much for joining me today, Ed. We're going to have a lot more talk this week, everyone. Christopher Carter will be back on the North Shore Drive on Wednesday. I'll be back with Paul Zeiss on Thursday, and then obviously Chris has the North Shore Drive as well on Friday. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel for all of that. Make sure you like this video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm, and we will talk to you again soon. Thanks, Ed.
Okay, thanks, Adam.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.